Director and writer Ari Aster's first feature film, Hereditary, depicts a Graham family melodrama in the events that follow the death of the grandmother Ellen. In an interview on the making of the film, Aster reveals his interest in the misleadings of tidy domestic life and the pretense of sanity or being contented. He chooses to emphasize betrayal, distrust, anger, and miscommunication. He changes the happy family ending and instead tells a story in which something terrible happens and the person doesn't get back up. Rather than seduce his characters to cope healthily with their losses and heal their pain, he shows them slowly losing to the family curse and to those who host the demon spirit. Evidently, the delusions and frustrations festering in the host members put strain on the rest of the family and fuel or rather reinvigorate distrust and demise. A prime example of this melodrama is the dinner scene where Annie and her son Peter start a war on sympathy and betrayal. He asks her if she wants to say anything, presumably in regards to Charlie's death. She retorts by saying he would only sneer at her and be ungrateful for all she does for him. The fighting words escalate, and at the climax of the scene, she exclaims that no one in the family takes responsibility for their actions. Peter then quietly reminds her that she has yet to assume responsibility for her part in Charlie's death. Aster also mentions that he wanted the audience to find out information at the same time the family does. This plays to the real-life nature of drama and melodrama because in real life we don't hear information from an omniscient force. We discover news based on circumstances, or as our parents find out, or as our siblings overhear, or as we involve ourselves. Luckily, it's not that hard to tell this family is messed up. They are manipulated by outside forces and feel small in their own environment. This is symbolized by the dolls in the dollhouse that Annie rearranges to please herself. Finally, this movie may indeed serve the melodrama genre more than the horror genre, as the director says. This is because sometimes this movie does not seem like it is trying to scare you, but rather tell you a story that is simply horrific. The first half of the film truly focuses on loss and grief rather than the manifestation of evil.
A recurring theme in horror films is the monstrous mother. Like with Psycho and Rosemary's Baby, a mother's struggle becomes the driving force of the narrative. Revealed to us in a support group session for people who've lost loved ones, we learn of the mental health struggles Annie's grown up around. Annie's mom, Ellen, had DID and dementia. Her dad died of starvation when she was little because he had psychotic depression, and her older brother had schizophrenia and hanged himself at 16, blaming their mother for, quote-unquote, putting people inside him. The madness seems to be hereditary. Talk about living through your children. Speaking of which, this family is creepy as hell. Motherhood presents itself throughout Hereditary as possession. It passes on from Charlie to Annie to Peter. Ellen latched on to Charlie when she was born. It's literally in their blood. When we join Annie, she is already haunted. That is, by grief. The deaths of both Charlie and Ellen in such close proximity is what creates the monster in this story. Annie becomes possessed by grief, loss, and anger, both as a mother and as a child. In the well-known horror film Psycho, Norman Bates literally turns into his mother. Though it's not actually her, we don't know that until the end. It's as though his mother consumed him or possessed him. Just as Annie is haunted by Ellen's death, Norman deals with his mother's loss by committing a gruesome murder. They each succumb to the curse put upon them by their evil matriarch, later becoming what they feared all along. These films take mommy issues to a whole new level. Additionally, the classic Rosemary's Baby is an important comparison when talking about mothers in the horror genre. When discussing the monstrous mother, we must understand that because women in horror movies are the most vulnerable, they can then become the most powerful through possession or manipulation. Both Annie and Rosemary have been maneuvered by satanic cults without knowing it. Their fierce protectiveness of their children does not prevent their inevitable transformation. Eventually, they become what children fear. The ideas in these films contrast how we think mothers should be. Caring, gentle, loving. It's what makes their transformation so disturbing to watch. You root for them, but they lose. Women in film are often depicted as being fragile or beings that need protection. They provide comfort and tend to the needs of their children. In Hereditary, Annie can be a caring mother, but this is a horror movie, so she can't just be that.
Now let's take a look at some of the tropes we found in Hereditary. There are a ton of them, so I'll only list our favorites. Number 1, birds. Birds are a reoccurring trope throughout the film. We first encounter birds when one flies into Charlie's classroom window, killing itself. If that wasn't bad enough, Charlie proceeds to cut off the bird's head and made a doll with it. Charlie also makes an odd clicking noise with their mouth that can resemble some birds. And finally, a birdcage hangs in the final treehouse sequence of the film. We can see birds as a horror trope in other films such as The Birds, The Witch, and Black Swan, often representing things such as the plague and death. Number 2, Can't Kill Yourself or The Thing. Annie tries to get Steve to burn Charlie's notepad, which will presumably end all the horrors, killing Annie as well. But Steve won't do it, so in desperation, Annie tosses it into the fire herself. Unshockingly, this plan does not end things and ends up killing Steve instead, almost taunting Annie right in her face. This trope is in countless horror films, but burning the Ouija board or the Babadook's evil book has never seemed to work. Number 3, Kind Person was evil all along. Joan is a character that is introduced partway through the film as a friend to a distressed Annie. She allows Annie to open up and is seemingly a comfort for her and the audience. It is later revealed that Joan is actually part of Payman's cult and was orchestrating Peter's possession by manipulating Annie. We can see this trope in the film Alien and its sequel, yet this trope is certainly not limited to the horror genre. Number 4, the supernatural proof one. The one person in this film who seems to have his head on straight is the father, Steve. He's the only one who doesn't end up possessed. He stays grounded, rational, and sane. Of course, this doesn't save him from his own horrible demise. We see this trope in many horror films such as The Shining, where the wife is the only character who doesn't directly experience the hotel's supernatural influence. And finally, this trope is a classic to the horror genre. If I had to list all the horror films with this trope, this essay would go on forever. Tons of occurrences in Hereditary warrant a call to the local sheriff, and although our supernatural proof and rational Steve suggests giving them a call, no police are ever contacted. So those were our favorite tropes, but here's some more that we found. Overall, Hereditary is an incredibly unique and well-made film, no matter how many classic tropes it has. The film is cold, unsettling, and certainly has something to say. We rate this film 10 out of 10 bird heads for being so creepy.